Jews have been hated because they were rich and because they were poor, because they were capitalists and because they were communists, because they believed in tradition and because they were rootless cosmopolitans, because they kept to themselves and because they penetrated everywhere. You see, anti-Semitism is not a belief, it's a virus. Yishai Ribo is a 34-year-old Sephardic Jewish singer from a traditional family that emigrated from France to Israel. On September the 11th, 2023, he did something that was previously deemed unimaginable. He played in Madison Square Gardens to a sellout audience. It was the first time that an Orthodox Jew performed there, let alone to more than 20,000 people. It was beautiful, it was peaceful, it was surreal. Fast forward to February 27th, 2024, just 2 or so weeks ago, and he performed once more. Again, it was a sellout crowd, albeit a much smaller crowd, as it was taking place at Harvard University, put on by Chabad for the Jewish students. The vibe in the room was electric. The vibe outside the room was utterly toxic. There were police standing literally at all the entrances just to protect those inside. There was chanting, there were placards, there was screaming, there was so much venom being spewed. It's like a tale of two cities, two different eras, two distinct universes. What happened in just barely 6 months? What changed so much in so short a period of time? To say Israel happened, the war with Gaza happened is too simplistic an answer. What really happened was the exposure of an uncomfortable truth that was taken for granted for far too long. And that uncomfortable truth is that anti-Semitism is a light sleeper. The implication is that it's always there, albeit lurking somewhat underground, just waiting for a reason to resurface. And as irrational a phenomenon as anti-Semitism is, it has never been eradicated. At best, it was suppressed over a period of time because it wasn't fashionable and society conditions us to curb our prejudices. But throughout the course of history, it has always been existent. It's very much like a sleeping dog, or a dog more precisely sleeping with one eye open. And when opportunity lends itself, it rears its ugly head yet again. Perhaps we become too complacent. Perhaps we had it so good for so long that we didn't think it would manifest itself yet again, not to that extent. Perhaps we assumed that if we chanted the mantra never again enough times, then so shall it be. Only today, of course, the buzzword is mainly no longer Jew. The post-Holocaust era has delineated that taboo to remain in place alongside other extreme forms of racial slur. So in place of Jew, of course, now we have Israel, Zionist, and whatever else besides. You see, hating Jews is no longer politically correct. Hating Israel and Israelis is the correct way to hate Jews today. Some will argue, as they do, that being critical of Israel is not being anti-Semitic. So let's be clear. Of course, it's possible to criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic. Israelis do it all the time. And whilst for some you can separate the two, for the overwhelming majority, the lines have become fundamentally blurred. And reality speaks for itself. Because when a Jewish rabbi in Italy is stabbed because of what's going on in Israel, and when a Jewish businessman in France is beaten because of what's going on in Israel, and when a Jewish professor in the United States is boycotted because of what's going on in Israel, and a Jewish student in London is cursed on the streets because of what's going on in Israel, then it is no longer to do with Israel or with Zionism or with so-called occupation, and it has everything to do with Judaism, and anti-Semitism. Mainstream culture is finding cover for the age-old hatred of Jews. They figured it out. So long as the attack is battered and flash-fried in a light coat of anti-Israel sentiment, and so long as you can pretend that you're fighting for human rights, then the rise of anti-Semitism becomes socially acceptable. To be sure, credit has to be given to governments and other such law enforcements that have prioritized legislation against race hate crimes. But what does legislation really do, apart from suppress something rather than genuinely cure it? Anti-Semitism is not some disease like polio that can be eradicated by social and legislative medicine. You know, they tell of a man, traveling salesman, who made a deliberate point of no matter where he was anywhere in the world, he would make a conscious decision to attend a minyan, to attend a local synagogue to pray. Problem for him was when he was in Shropshire, the backwaters of the UK, and there wasn't a synagogue for 100 square miles. So he did the next best thing. He went into his local church, and he just sat at the back, and he put on his tallis and his tefillin, and he started to pray. It was a Sunday. People are coming in for prayers, for Mass. And after a while, people are looking at him rather uncomfortably, at which point the priest very delicately actually clears his throat and says, "Will all non-Christians please make your way to the exit as services are about to commence?" This man, he pulls his tallis tight over his head. He's oblivious. He's really going for it. The incredulous priest says, "All non-Christians, please make your way out now." And he's just rocking back and forth, again, completely oblivious to what is being said, at which point the priest bellows, "All Jews, leave now." And suddenly the man pauses, stops, takes off his tallis and tefillin, rolls them all up, packs it under one arm, walks to the front of the church, takes the statue of you-know-who, puts it under his other arm and says, "Come on, Bubala, we're not wanted here." Throughout the course of history, we have been told, you are not wanted here. And many scholars and many historians, including many Jews themselves, choose to view this ongoing obsession with the Jews not as something uniquely connected to Jews or Judaism, but rather as a multitude of isolated events resulting from distinct circumstances. Arabs hated Jews because we are occupiers. Germans hate Jews because they were the scapegoat for a depressed economy. Christians hated Jews because we supposedly killed their God. Stalin murdered Jews because they were capitalists, whilst Europeans in the Middle Ages killed Jews and loathed the Jew because of his financial success. The hard fact is that anti-Semitism has existed too long and in too many disparate cultures to tolerate a claim that in each instance it is because of some distinct factor disconnected from being Jewish. Or to put it in the words of the book, Why the Jews, economic depressions do not account for gas chambers. Jews have been hated because they were rich and because they were poor, because they were capitalists and because they were communists, because they believed in tradition and because they were rootless cosmopolitans, because they kept to themselves and because they penetrated everywhere. You see, anti-Semitism is not a belief. It's a virus. The human body has an immensely sophisticated immune system which develops defenses against viruses. But it's penetrated, however, because viruses mutate. Anti-Semitism mutates, and that's what we're bearing witness to today. And my point in all of this is that we can no longer afford to bury our head in the sand and assume that this too shall pass. Yes, I'm sure when things might calm down in Israel, then please God, everything else will calm down everywhere else as well. But if there's one thing that these past few months have shown us, is that those who hate us an awful lot more than we imagined. And no matter how calm things might become, we cannot afford to become complacent anymore. To the flip side, and this must be said as well, I was walking in the West End of London some 3 weeks after October 7th, and a big, burly, muscly, tattooed guy carrying a coffee in both hands suddenly calls out to me and he says, "Excuse me." And I think to myself, okay, here we go. And I said, "Yes." And he says, "It's really terrible what's going on out there, isn't it?" And I replied, "Yes, it is." And he adds, "I'm really sorry about that." And I was so pleasantly stunned, thanked him, and told him how much I appreciated his support. And it occurred to me immediately in that moment that we have a lot of friends out there as well. And indeed, make no mistake about it, those who like us more than we realize as well. In fact, I genuinely believe they actually represent the majority. The problem is they're very much a silent majority, which means, ladies and gentlemen, after all said and done, it's down to us, down to the leaders of today, to confront this problem head on. And there is only one real way to go about doing this. Because try as we may, we're always going to be limited in our capacity to weaken the enemy. The only alternative is to strengthen ourselves. Some argue that we're better off keeping a low profile, as has become very much the acceptable norm in many parts of Europe. I don't buy it. I maintain that when reverting to what the author Israel Zangwill described as the ghetto stoop, walking with our heads down, keeping below the radar, we are essentially nurturing the germ. We're scoring an own goal. If the whole point and purpose of anti-Semitism is to reduce the Jewish people into oblivion, then surely when keeping a low profile, you are effectively accommodating the process. And therefore, the way that we strengthen ourselves is by enhancing our own identity. I have borne witness, as I'm sure many of you have, to so many Jews, otherwise never seen throughout the year, suddenly coming out of the woodwork. I am aware of numerous examples of Jews who have completely stopped identifying for so many years, suddenly reaching out, looking to reconnect. We have to respond to that call. We have to enable Jews to understand and appreciate what it means to be Jewish in the 21st century, such that they can then hold their heads high, because the hard fact is that the world will always respect Jews who respect themselves, and they won't respect Jews who don't. The most vulnerable out there, as we've heard throughout this afternoon, are the Jewish students on those what could only be described as brainwashed university campuses enthralled to poisonous identity politics. Sure, we could encourage them maybe to go to Holocaust museums. We can perhaps arrange trips for them to Poland, etc. And as meaningful as those things are, and they are, I've always maintained, why guilt-trip Jews about their Judaism based on their past, rather than teaching them how to celebrate their Judaism in the present? And as we've heard previously, a perfect example of this, which has always impressed me, is the Sinai Scholars Program funded by Mr. George Rohr. I've met so many of those students. They are incredible young men. They are extremely engaged. They are celebrating Jewish life and living, being fortified with knowledge and conviction. They walk around as loud and proud Jews on their campuses, and frankly, it is beautiful to behold. You see, bricks and mortar may preserve history, but it alone cannot ignite the depth of a Jewish soul. True connection and understanding emerges from education and engagement with one's heritage and community. I'm going to add the following with a trigger alert. You may not like what I'm about to say. Yes, it is important to support Israel. Yes, it is important to strengthen what is essentially our homeland. But first, the Israel of today is not like the Israel of yesteryear, needing to come cap in hand to the diaspora. It is an economically strong country with a booming high-tech industry, medical industry, and much else besides. So even as, indeed, we are inclined to support Israel, we cannot any longer afford to ignore the diaspora. There are as many, indeed, perhaps more Jews here. And unless everybody is going to make Aliyah and move to Israel, and let's face it, however idealistic, that's not going to happen, we have to consider what we can do for Jewish survival here, no less than there. Because the threat of anti-Semitism that is targeting the very essence of Jewish identity in the diaspora is as much an existential threat as the peril of whichever physical enemies in Israel. And I want to stress, this is not being negative about Israel. This is being positive about the diaspora. This is recognizing that a strong Israel depends very much on a strong diaspora, believing in the Jewish future of the diaspora and investing in that future. So let me wrap up with this. We should not allow ourselves to be defined by anti-Semitism. 3,300 years of Jewish continuity, and we have to live it ourselves so that we can preserve that little corner in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest surviving persecuted minority. That's really not the point of it all. We're going to be celebrating Purim which was the first attempted final solution. And the Talmud famously explains how the villain Haman, the all-original Hitler, Yamach Shemai, scored his PR offensive with the king Achashverosh at that time. He concocted his own myths without context. He argued, they're lazy, they don't work on the weekends, they don't work on the many Jewish festivals, they won't eat our food, they won't marry our women, etc., etc. And of course, as we know, later Queen Esther, the heroine of the Purim story, steps up to counter in her plea to the king. She discloses her Jewish identity, stating simply, Ki nimkarnu ani ve'ami, these are my people, and we are at risk. She tugs at the heartstrings, and the decree is averted. And the Rebbe asks the following basic question. But what about all those initial complaints that Haman brought? Everything he highlighted about our different laws, our different behavior, our different mindset, it's all true. It swayed the king in the first instance. Esther doesn't seem to address any of that. So what changed the king's mind? And the Rebbe stresses and points out that she does address it. She says, Ani va'ami, these are my people, this is my identity, this is who I am. That's it. Achashverosh loves Esther's grace and her nobility. He loved her essence and her soul. She says to the king, you love me? You love my essence? You know what my essence is? I am a Jew. These are my people. Yes, our laws are different. Is that a bad thing? They're Jewish values. It's what defines me. Yes, we have days when we don't work. Is that a bad thing? It's one of the many things that makes me, me, and indeed what you love about me. And the point is, to the ignorant hater, of which there are plenty, you can get into the nitty-gritty of the debate, but that'll only make enough of a difference to those who care enough to want to listen. But to the ultimate retort of the irrational hatred out there, it's simply ani va'ami. With the ever-increasing threat of anti-Semitism rearing its ugly head, with Israel living under a constant barrage of terror, in the face of all this, we have a very real choice to make. What can we here in this room do to let those powerful words, ani va'ami, resonate? We have to invest in people and inculcate them with the understanding that as Jews, we are not afraid to be different, and that it's better to be a hero walking alone in one direction than with the crowd going in the wrong direction. We have to teach them that with every ugly protest condemning Israel whilst simultaneously attacking Jews, we stand that much straighter. With every anti-Semitic, ignorant, malign hashtag tweeted, we wave our banner of pride that much higher. And with every provocation brought to the United Nations, hoping that maybe Israel will disappear when denounced on a political platform, we are reminded how fortunate we are to be Jewish. With every odious demonstration, with every violent aspersion, with every lie fabricated and every abuse, we are that much prouder that we belong to a religion, to a nation, to a belief system where our optimism replaces pessimism and our faith exceeds our fear. So they might tragically kill our brothers and sisters in Israel. They might pitifully attack us on the streets of London or the campuses of Los Angeles, and we shed a tear, and we cry, and we lament, but they will never, ever break our spirit. Not then, and not now. We must do all we can to reinforce the message, a message of pride, a message of dignity, a message that declares loud and clear, Ani va'ami, and that Am Yisrael Chai, we the Jewish people have, are, and will always live on forevermore. Thank you.